Okay. Okay, so I think I was saying to think of this as a response to dynamic non-equilibrium. This is anything that's happening in the moment. I'm trying to keep everybody alive right now. I see there's stuff in the chat. Okay. What was the bioluminescence example for evolve to survive? So I was looking at replicating strategies that work and just how many times those things evolved through completely different organisms. We've got jellyfish to fireflies, super different. Okay, I'm gonna move on to incorporating diversity. I'm kind of going back and forth between your notes and mine here. Okay, so when I'm looking at incorporating diversity, I'm looking at a fail-safe. I'm looking at a backup system, and that's why it says in here, I'm including multiple forms, processes, or systems to meet a functional need. What I highlighted at mine was can be having access to different strategies at different times. So, example, we know within an organism's lifespan, we might have some cyclical processes, which I mentioned up here, and adapt to changing conditions. If we have seasons, then we might have organisms whose coats change color. So they've got a different, oh my goodness, what is happening now? We've got a different strategy. It's the same thing. They still have fur, they still have the same coat, but they've got multiple forms of it. So in winter, they can survive with the camouflage. In summer, maybe it's a little less thick, maybe got less of the down underneath, but they've got the same strategy, it just alters. So that's a really good way to think about that one. And also at the top of each of these, you'll notice that I gave you a little thing to look for with your group, just a little clue. Okay, maintain integrity through self-renewal. This sounds tricky, but it's really not. So it says persist by constantly adding energy and matter to heal and improve the system. Oh, well, if I'm adding matter and energy, what does that mean? Well, I'm getting energy into the organism. What does that mean? Well, I'm eating, right? Like that's the easiest explanation. So right here under example, on mine I wrote, getting energy in the organism and up the food chain. We've got plants do it differently than animals, but I'm adding energy, nutrients into the system. So that's what I wrote for that first one. We can think about it on a smaller scale, looking at each organ system. So if you think about what each system is using in terms of energy and nutrients, 3 super easy examples of what I wrote on mine: digestive, respiratory, circulatory. If you think about self-renewal there, what are the things I'm always taking in? What are the things that I'm bringing out? Maintaining integrity just means I'm keeping it working by perpetually adding things in there to heal. Molecular scale, this would be a good one to highlight right here. Again, if you're someone who's pretty good at biology, this should sort of spring into your mind. DNA transcription and translation is just the process of using the DNA to the RNA, figuring out which protein to make. That whole thing is using some of those nutrients and amino acids that you've brought in, some that your body can make, some that it can't. And so I'm synthesizing things all the time. Proteins run just about everything in your body. So on a molecular scale, that's an example. Under keywords down here, I wrote healing and growth. I'm maintaining integrity, I'm keeping up the strength. Whatever my body part does, I want to make sure it can still do the thing. Self-renewal, healing. All right, so again, there should be a couple things that you're thinking about in here. I'll give you an example in terms of bioluminescence. When we think of a chemical reaction, I've got the reactants that go together, and then I have the product at the end. Well, once I have that product and that chemical reaction is done, it's done. So if I want to recreate that, I need to bring in those original ingredients again so I can create that reaction again. So if I'm maintaining integrity through self-renewal, I'm adding matter and energy into the system. Well, that means I have to recreate that luciferin. I have to recreate that luciferase. I have to bring in more oxygen into the system. And in insects, it's like the little spiracles on the side of their body. I have to regulate all that matter and energy coming in so that I can do that reaction again. So that would be a good example to put here. Just bringing stuff in to keep everything flowing.
Can you post the notes with your add-ins after the class?
Yeah,
Just
I will.
stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I don't have this example right here on mine. That was a freebie. All right, last one. So again, adapting to changing conditions, I'm thinking a little bit more about now. By maintaining integrity, I'm breathing, I'm eating now. If I'm incorporating diversity, in the next year, I might alter some changes, some behaviors, some traits. I might keep my hair really long. I might grow a beard if it's cold, whatever. This is more in the now. Embody resilience. Okay, resilient. So if something changes, I've got dynamic non-equilibrium, I've got cycles, I've got changes in weather, sunlight, whatever. I have to stay resilient. Okay, through variation, redundancy, and decentralization. Okay, so I said incorporate diversity. I'm kind of using the same thing over and over. So it says multiple forms or processes, but it's kind of the same process over and over from year to year. So again, my example of like the hare or the fox that change color, they've got those strategies going back and forth from their fur, but it's the same thing from year to year. And there's multiple things within that year to help them adapt to the changing condition of the seasons. When I'm looking at this one, I'm usually looking at smaller scale things. And instead of having like a different color or a different shape, I'm looking at sort of the same thing repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. It's doing the same job, but I've got a lot of them. So that if one stops working, I'm still okay. So this is a little bit like one of the evolve to survive connections. I'm not going to tell you which one. So there's 3 pieces here. I have to have a duplicate form. I got to have a bunch of the same thing that does the same job. Decentralization means they're not all packed together in one place. They're all sprinkled around. Okay, so this is like if you're someone who's invested in stocks, or you have, you're thinking about how you're going to use your money. They talk about diversification for a reason. You don't put all your money in one place. You don't just stick it under your mattress. You have some things in various places. So if one thing falls, a stock market crashes, you're still kind of okay. So my example here that I used, so think about like the hair that you've got all over your body. It generally does some of the same functions. You've got protection, you've got warmth. In some cases, you've got sort of a pheromonal thing that's going on as well. It's in different areas all over your body, so it's not all clumps together. The forms, however, are pretty duplicate. So some's longer, some shorter, you've got some different textures, but generally, if I look at the chemical composition, it's basically the same stuff. Now, again, this makes more sense if you think about us like deep evolutionarily, when like way more body hair in the environment made a big difference than now, where it's sort of generally useless, but it's still a good example. The other example I gave you, and this sort of loosely tied to what I was talking about with bioluminescence, is your hemoglobin proteins. Well, we've got multiple hemoglobin proteins are macromolecules, within one red blood cell. So I've got duplicates, but then I also have a ton of red blood cells. So I have even more duplicate forms. Okay, check. Variation, I got a bunch of them. They're the same thing. Yep. They're not clumped together. Yep. They're all over the body. Yep. I don't just have red blood cells like in my head. They're all over the place. That one's usually a little tougher to find. And sometimes you either have to kind of think about it like on a molecular scale or on a whole systems scale, is where we usually see lots of the same form repeating.
Professor?
Yeah.
For the hair example, wouldn't that be clumped together because hair is everywhere?
So I'm talking more about the strategy there. Like, are you talking about incorporate diversity? Are you talking about like hair itself for this?
Oh, like the hair example you said, it's supposed
Okay.
to have like
So,
variation.
yes, it
redundancy.
is kind of all together. I guess thinking of an animal is probably an animal is a better way to put it than a human. But like, I don't have, for example, all my eyelashes in one eye. I don't have the hair on my head in like one tuft. So yeah, you're right. It's not a perfect example. And if you think of like an organism that's fully hairy, it's a better example.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, last one. This is one that's actually not so tricky that people tend to think is really tricky. One of these in particular is really going to stand out to you when you get into your stuff today. I'm going to go over this pretty quickly because I want to give you enough time to really look at this stuff in your groups. If I'm using life-friendly chemistry, that just means I'm using stuff that's not wrecking the environment. That's pretty straightforward. So I wrote on here, nature doesn't poison itself. And this is the part that I highlighted. There's no pollution, there's only resources. Chemistry is always either a value add, it makes the environment better, or it's neutral, it doesn't do any harm. I'm never making it worse than what it is. Pretty easy to compare that to our lives. Nature's building, creating, modifying, making, without putting all this junk into the ecosystem. So I said, consider all steps, all three. Well, we've got sort of three components here. I've got the chemicals, the reactants, and the energy I'm using. I've got the actual reaction or process itself. And then I have the products at the end. So when I'm talking about using life-friendly chemistry, I'm looking at sort of that whole gradient of things. What am I putting in? How am I processing that? When I come out of there, what are my byproducts? What's the usable, helpful product? Are any of those things long-term toxic in nature? Nope. Now, where there's kind of an exception is this first sub-principle. Break down products into benign constituents. Well, if something is a benign tumor, it's something that's not causing harm. Use chemistry in which decomposition results in no harmful byproducts. This isn't always decomposition. Usually it is. I can also be thinking about just the byproducts on their own before they're decomposed a little bit. So at the end of a reaction, again, this should be sparking something in your brain. You haven't created anything that causes harm. You've neutralized something. Aha, it's benign. Or, and this is perhaps where you're going to see this more often, just sort of generally in nature, if it's a toxin. So on mine, I wrote, for example, the blue ring octopus, snake venom, any of those things. We know we've got both poisons and we've got venoms. Those things we know are toxic. However, it's only harmful to the target audience. If a snake bites the thing, those neurotoxins are going to course through the thing's body, but they decay really quickly. If that snake and sprays its venom out and it lands on the ground, it's not going to take long before those things just sort of break up and dissolve into something that's not harmful. So if there is a harmful effect, it's not sticking around. It's just going to the intended audience just really quickly. Okay. Build selectively with a small subset of elements. Anybody know how many elements are on the periodic table? There's no reason for you to know that. There's about 118. Nature doesn't use all 118, especially not the radioactive ones. We only use some of the metals. We don't have noble gases in our bodies. Those things don't react to anything, and we survive on chemical reactions. So we've got 118. Nature uses about 25. So I've jot that in there. And really, oh, I have it in there. Okay, so highlight that. There's 6. And I want you to look for these today. There's 6 that we use over and over and over and over. So when we think about it, if you think about the insane complexity of all of our bodies, the fact that we're just using, for the most part, 6 elements to recombine, that's kind of mind-blowing. So I wrote in there, think of DNA as an analogy. I've got 4 base pairs. I see incredible variety that comes from that. Or I said if you've got 6 colors of Legos, or if you've got just a handful of ingredients you always keep in your kitchen, but you can do a ton of different things with like butter and flour and eggs and whatever. So that's what that means. So look for those in particular. And that's something that you'll write over here with your group. And last, doing chemistry in water. Well, why does that make sense? +70% of our bodies are water. So we're going to be doing the chemistry in water. Also, if you look at our planet, water. So if you don't know what a solvent is, just a quick reminder, I wrote down some notes for you there as well. The solvent is the thing that you're using to dissolve another thing in. So if you've got water and you throw the sugar in there, your water is your solvent. Now, I just put a bunch of examples in there for you. When we're in various human industries, we often don't use water. We use really toxic chemicals. And then like whether it's a lubricant or a dye or something that we're using in dry cleaning, whatever it is, we're not using water. And so again, we're starting with a toxic component. The reaction is toxic. The end product is toxic. The byproducts are toxic. Nature's not doing that. And one of the reasons is we're starting with water. And again, why are we starting with water? Well, it's non-toxic. It's everywhere in our bodies. It's everywhere on our planet. That means it's also just really accessible. All right, so that's a super quick overview. What I'm going to ask you to do in just a minute, I'm going to throw you guys into breakup groups, and you can kind of decide which part you want to start in. Either you can start thinking about all the things that we've learned about with bioluminescence from last week and the story I told you on Monday, and you can start plugging in examples in here. If you're like, you know, I can kind of do that more on my own, that's not so hard, the chemistry is what freaks me out, you might want to start on the mural, the information there, and then using this page first before you move on. So let me show you what that's going to look like before I break you up here. All right, so I made each of your groups this. You can always take a screenshot of this stuff too if you want to keep it. So you're going to write your group names in there. I've given you in the yellow, this is kind of a shorter version of the big, huge story that I told you on Monday. And this is a really nice diagram that's a good analogy for just summing up the basics. So if you're like, what was she talking about again? It's right here for you. What I want you to do is to focus on the big picture through the lens of life-friendly chemistry, okay? So if you have a printed copy, have those out in front of you so you can look at that. If you can print the notes you just took, have that in front of you. It's going to help then going from screen to screen. And I've given you a couple of questions, and each one is relating to a specific set of pictures. I want you to look specifically for some of the things we talk about. Do you see particular 6+ elements that are used over and over and over? When you look at the beginning to the end of a reaction, what's the same? What's different? When you look at different molecules, what's the same? What's different? Why does that make sense? I don't want you to memorize anything. I want you to look for patterns through the lens of, well, we know this and this creates this. We know all these different organisms do it. We know it evolved a bunch of different times. What do you expect to see? What do you see? So if you want to start with this and then go back to this, that's fine. I also left you a space right here. So after you've jotted in as a group your ideas, it'd be a really good idea to then copy and paste this right into your notes or take a screenshot so that you have everything in one place. All right, I'm going to stop recording and stop